Hi everyone, today we're talking about introverted thinking through the perspective of Carl Jung. In the last couple of weeks we have discussed extroverted thinking and extroverted feeling. I've been analyzing some of Jung's writing on these functions from his most famous book, Psychological Types. And today we will be doing something very similar with respect to introverted thinking. So tune in for that, all about that in the next few minutes. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. So, as I was saying earlier, Jung basically described the difference between the same type of function by looking at the different attitude. So here I mean the difference between extroverted thinking and introverted thinking, namely that they both come from the same mental process, thinking, but they have a different attitude, extroverted or introverted. In the original Jungian theory, extroversion and introversion plays a very important role because it kind of redirects all mental processes in a very different way. So, when it comes specifically to introverted thinking, one of the passages that I liked and was quite interesting was, when my thoughts are engaged with a concrete object or general idea in such a way that the course of my thinking eventually leads me back again to my object, this intellectual process is not the only psychic proceeding taking place in me at the moment. I will disregard all those possible sensations and feelings which come noticeable as a more or less disturbing accompaniment to my train of thought, merely emphasizing the fact that this very thinking process, which proceeds from objective data and strives again towards the object, stands also in a constant relation to the subject. Even though my thinking process is directed as far as possible towards objective data, nevertheless it is my subjective process, and it can neither escape the subjective admixture nor yet dispense with it. So, what I really like here about the way Carl Jung talks about introverted thinking is that he shows how this function is indeed interested with data and facts, but in contrast to extroverted thinking, it doesn't really aim to go out with that information. It strives to make sense of what it learns, of those objective external things, facts, pieces of information, etc., etc. But it eventually leads back to the self, because as an introverted function, and here we mean specifically for those that have introverted thinking as their lead process, so in current understanding for the MBTI system, INTPs and ISTPs, this evaluation and this logical process eventually leads back to the self, to the subject. There is kind of like a feedback loop that goes from the self to the outside, to all of that information, data, etc., etc., and then feeds back to the self. This is something that Jung proposed in contrast with extroverted thinking. Now, of course, you might say, well, how do I see this? How do I make sense if someone really does this or not? I think it's easier to notice it within yourself, this particular difference, but then there are other things that can help us more clearly distinguish between TE and TI. And now I'm going to go further and discuss other things that Carl Jung wrote about introverted thinking. So again, he said, the introverted thinking type, so INTP, ISTP, is characterized by a priority of the thinking I have just described. Like his extroverted parallel, he is decisively influenced by ideas. These, however, have their origin not in the objective data, but in the subjective foundation. Like the extrovert, he too will follow his ideas, but in the reverse direction, inwardly, not outwardly. Intensity is his aim, not extensity. In these fundamental characters, he differs markedly, indeed quite unmistakably, from his extroverted parallel. Like every introverted type, he is almost completely lacking in that which distinguishes his countertype, namely the intensive relatedness to the object. So again, something that can help us tell apart TE from TI is the intensity that TI engages in order to understand something. Whereas TE is much more interested in finding some sort of a solution, finding some sort of a principle, and as we discussed a couple of weeks ago, to apply it to as many things as possible. So it likes going wide, making something that works for as many people as possible, whereas TI does a bit of the reverse. It also likes formulating a principle, a conclusion, but it prefers to go with one thing into more depth than to apply it to as many contexts as possible. And in that sense, maybe TI can even be more differential when it comes to certain things that apply in different contexts. I would say that TI types are much more likely to say it depends on the situation, it is different depending on the situation, than TE types, who are more likely to tell you this is how it is and this is how it works. Of course, not always, but this is something that can kind of relate to what Jung was saying here earlier. And now, going a bit deeper on that. This negative relation to the object indifference and even aversion characterizes every introvert. It also makes a description of the introverted type in general extremely difficult. With him, and here he means introverted thinking type, everything tends to disappear and get concealed. His judgment appears cold, obstinate, arbitrary, and inconsiderate simply because he's related less to the object than the subject. Again, because it is an introverted function, and those who have this function as their lead process, their hero function or dominant function, they are more likely to prefer, kind of making judgments that kind of make more sense to themselves, even if this is not really what they will say or what they will intend in a conscious way. But this is my guess here, because it kind of leads to the idea that if one person is so interested in explaining that system to the self, or in relation to the subjective self, then of course when it gives arguments while talking to other people, this will lead to a much more detached and cold mannerism, let's say. When the time comes for him to transplant his ideas into the world, he is by no means the heir of an anxious mother for her children's welfare. He merely exposes them and is often extremely annoyed when they fail to thrive on their own account. This makes me smile and laugh because I find TI types, especially INTPs and ISTPs, to be very interested in seeing how other people independently learn, independently do something. They will like giving some inputs here and there, but they will be more interested to see how that person filters the information through their own, thinking style or experience or personality or whatever. And will have less patience to sit with them and take them step by step, an approach that T users tend to thrive better in, the step-by-step KPI perspective that we often find in companies as well. So TI types, especially as I said, INTPs and ISTPs, will really appreciate when others will independently do things, maybe more so than any other type. If to his eyes his product appears subjectively correct and true, it must also be so in practice, and others have simply got to bow to his truth. Again, this is something that in my opinion characterizes TI types quite well, in the sense that when they get really interested in something and they analyze something a lot, that fundamental truth that they came to as a conclusion matters so much to them that they will be annoyed if other people do not recognize its value or importance. And also, I really like how Jung was describing the general let's have doubts perspective that TI types have, in the sense that when they argue or when they analyze something, when they come to certain conclusions about things that they learn about, they will be much more likely to doubt things. I was saying this in a video where I compared TI and TE, namely that introverted thinking takes in information from the outside and tries to fit it in the internal puzzle, in the internal framework. And if it makes sense, it will be accepted. If it doesn't make sense, it will be thrown away. And this causes this process of doubting things again and again and again, which is extremely distinct of TP types, especially TI hero types. On the other hand, as I was mentioning before, extroverted thinking is much more likely to say, okay, if this is a reliable source, then I will take the information, I will try to apply it, and if later I will find out that this doesn't work, I'm more likely to dispose of it. In that sense, I find TE to be more, let's say, steady in a way and less likely to doubt so much. Of course, TE types can doubt things, and of course, TI types don't always doubt everything, but overall, there seems to be this pattern kind of pointing towards the idea that TP types and even FJ types for that matter, who have introverted thinking, are more likely to doubt things until they reach a certain conclusion. So yeah, these were my thoughts on the introverted thinking function as described by Carl Jung. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts below. What do you think about it? Is there anything else that you would add, contrast, present from a different angle? I'm quite curious to see your thoughts below. And as always, thank you a lot for watching this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next week with another video on cognitive functions explained.